Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining me today. Let's start our discussion on OAuth 2 with Spring Security, and today's event, where I will stay for a few hours actually, I will only discuss this topic. So it's a marathon, that means I will stay here more than 1 hour, which is my usual length of lesson, and will only discuss one specific topic. But we will get into examples and hands-on stuff and hopefully clarify all of your questions and concerns. So if you are here with me live, don't forget to have a live chat there so you can ask your questions in the live chat. Of course, start discussions, share opinions, talk to each other as any other excellent community. So with that being said, I think I will just skip into sharing my screen, and I want to tell you from the beginning that I know that some of the concerns that I've been receiving throughout your messages in comments and LinkedIn and Twitter are that the part of the OAuth 2 that I presented in my last playlist on Spring Security was not clear enough, or at least some of you guys told me that you still don't really understand how this stuff works. So maybe today we have the chance, because we will only focus on this topic, to clarify all these, see a little bit more of customizations as well, like putting the client details in the database, for example, if you wish. And yeah, let's see what we can do in a few hours while I will still have my voice here with me. Yeah, first of all, I think it's better if we actually go into some diagrams and make sure that everyone understands from the very beginning again what OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect solves, which are the actors, which are the steps of the process, stuff like that. So now, as I usually like to describe it, so normally we have this client backend, front-end backend architecture, but I don't want, when I say front-end, I don't want you to understand that it's only about web applications. So indeed, this applies to web apps as well. In a lot of cases, it actually applies to web apps, and especially with stuff like single page applications, things made with frameworks like Angular or React or Vue or any of the other million frameworks that JavaScript has out there. And you know that in general we have something like a front end that might be a web app, but it might be a mobile app, for example. It might be a desktop application. So that's why I say, when I say front end, I don't want you to only imagine this is applicable solely for web applications, because that's not the case. And in the case of the backend, I usually represent it in the diagram with a rectangle, but yeah, that doesn't mean it's only one process. So I don't want you to believe that's only applicable, say, for monolithic applications, because this is just a representation of the backend, which can be designed as any architectural style as you'd like. So it can be a microservices architecture as well. It can be service oriented. It can be Lambda functions. I don't want to imply any architectural style, because again, what we discuss in terms of the authentication and authorization with OAuth 2 with Spring Security is not related directly to the architectural style. So it applies to microservices as well as with monolithic applications. But the problem is, so maybe we can now skip from front-end, back-end, and apply the usual terminology. So we call this the client, because the client can be a front-end app, but can be a desktop app, or can be a mobile application as well. And then we don't actually define this as being backend, but we call it a resource server. So the question is, how can we do something like having more resource servers, like completely different applications, for example, working with one set of credentials that defines a user. So imagine, and I'm pretty sure that this is likely your case, you are in an organization, and in an organization you work with pretty much a lot of tools. You might use different tools for storing and managing your code. You might use different tools for managing your tasks. You might use different tools for managing your time. And different other things like this, documentation and so on and so forth. So these are different tools, and in many cases even provided by different organizations, so they are totally different solutions. And what you don't want is having a separate set of credentials for each and any of them, and also what you don't want is to have to manage them separately in all these applications, because that makes things a lot more difficult for the apps themselves and things a lot less secure for your organization, which now stores the credentials in several places. And of course that would imply that you have more risk into losing them. So how would you actually solve, first of all, this case? Well, instead of having the authentication, like you could say normally have the authentication designed for any of these applications. Okay, so you have the part of the authentication here, and then you have it here as well, and then you have it like with any kind of backend implemented. So instead of having it like this, why not take it out completely and design it as a separate part of your system? So this is now an external process, a separate application that has as only purpose managing the credentials. And we will call this the Authorization Server. So that's why I will still represent it with an A. But instead of being just the capability of any of your resource servers, the A is now a separate application whose responsibility is to manage the credentials. So now what we have is the credentials managed here, and then somehow they need to be used by any of the possible resource servers, which can be more than one, because that's basically one of the things we wanted to achieve from the beginning. Now let's simplify the diagram a bit and come back to only the flow, for which we can only use one representation of one resource server, so we don't need to have all of them. But just remember that the backends can be multiple. So I have this backend, also called the resource server. By the way, why is it called the resource server? Because it protects resources. Resources can be either data or actions users or clients can do with the data. So that's basically it. It's the backend in fact, and the backend generally that's what it was doing. It was working with the data, but because we protect this data, we call them resources, and that's why this is the resource server in the OAuth 2 terminology. And this is the authorization server because its purpose is basically authenticate the client and the user, potentially if there exists a user, and then provide all the needed details for the backend to implement the authorization rules. So this is for the first thing, and again, I'm pretty sure that if you've been part of at least one organization, you have had this setup where you had multiple applications. Like even in the university it happens, you have something like that, no? And then of course we also have the other way around, because maybe you create a public app, an app that is available there outside on the internet for anyone who needs its use, but what you want is avoid storing yourself credentials, avoid implementing registration capabilities, logins, with storing data about sensitive data about your users in your database, because that basically puts you in it creates more difficulties for you. It gives you more responsibility as the app developer or manager or stakeholder, whatever you are, because suddenly you have sensitive data, and if you lose it, then you might even be against laws in different parts of the world. So how do you implement an app without having to store the user's credentials? And then how do you even allow your user to use different ways of logging in? Like we know that the majority of users might have a Gmail account, or they might have a Facebook account, they might have a Twitter account, they might have a GitHub account, and so on and so forth. So if these other applications who manage users' details would allow you to share the authentication and authorization responsibility, then you could offer your users the possibility to log in with their credentials from another system, like allowing them to log in with credentials from GitHub or Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn and so on. And maybe you can even give them the possibility to choose between multiple solutions. So that implies you might even have multiple authorization servers for your solution. So you don't only allow your user to have one social media which they can use to log in, but they can choose which social media they want to use, because some of us don't have, for example, a Facebook account. So you don't necessarily want to force your users into having a Facebook account, because they might not like Facebook, so they might not have such an account, but they do have, for example, Twitter or GitHub account. So you want to allow them log in with that one. So you give them multiple possibilities. See that you have multiple authorization servers. So the two possibilities, by externalizing the authentication and authorization responsibility, actually the authentication mainly responsibility, is as we discussed, first of all, that you might have multiple applications and have only one place where we manage the credentials, or you have one application, but you allow your user to log in with multiple possibilities. So that's basically the business part of the advantage. And the technical part of the advantage is that extracting the responsibility of the authentication into a different application, you would also have the possibility to easily horizontally scale that part. Which means that you would easily allow multiple requests to it simultaneously, so more users using your authentication wherever that's needed. So you have the choice if you want or not to horizontally scale that part of the application, that capability that refers to authentication. Now, again, to answer the question in advance, because I have it a lot of times, people ask me, can I put the authorization server and the resource server in the same application? I have these questions, this question I hear it a lot of times, and the answer is theoretically yes, you can do that. Now, remember that in terms of OAuth 2, what is OAuth 2? It's a specification. It's basically a document telling you how you should implement your authentication and authorization. So it's just telling you how to do that in terms of the process itself, but how you implement your app, what technologies you use, that doesn't matter. It's not part of OAuth 2 or OpenID Connect specifications, descriptions to tell you what you should use. That's why you will see authorization servers created with Node.js, as well as authorization servers created with Java, okay, and with different frameworks. You can even implement them vanilla, just you don't use a framework. I don't like Spring, I don't use Spring, I use Java vanilla, I implement it like that. My way of doing it, as long as I fulfill what the document says, it means that I am OAuth 2 compliant. It means that I implement the stuff the right way, or the right way meaning what? the way the majority understands, considers as being the right way to do it, because we didn't find big vulnerabilities and we know it's a safe way of working. So that's basically what it means to be compliant with the specification. So yes, you could put them together in the same process. Naturally, that is not really what brings you all the advantages. So in most cases, because what we've discussed, and you've seen what we've discussed here, the two business advantages plus the part of horizontally scaling would be more comfortable if the authorization server itself is a separate application. So even if the authorization server, the resource server, the client and the user, they are just actors, sometimes they can be mixed, but normally you wouldn't do that. So I hope that makes clear the answer to this question: can I put them in the same application or not? It is basically an yes, you could, but normally no, you don't. Okay, so let me see. Hi everyone, I see meanwhile some comments. I see already a lot of people here with me. Thank you very much for joining. I hope you will enjoy this session, and we will basically start coding soon, and I will explain the parts of first of all the authorization server, then the resource server. We go into some customization, so stay here with me because we have a few hours today and I'd like to do as much as possible in these few hours. So can you explain logout process, session invalidation, token revocation? Yes, let's go through that. I mean, they should be basically out of the box with the authorization server, so we can do that. Then is this recorded? Yes, it's recorded. You will be able to watch it later. If you will have questions, however, you'll have to leave them in the comment section, and it might take some time till I answer them, because I usually get a lot of questions. So sometimes it takes me a lot of time to find time to answer them, but yes, you can do that. And for a single page application, should I use a resource server to control the client secret? I'm not sure if I understand. What does it mean, use the resource server to control the client secret? Not really clear for me, sorry. So you will see in the process here how it works, but the client secrets are on the client side, and they are managed by the authorization server. So I don't see where's the link between the resource server and client secrets. So I would say the answer to your question is probably a no, because I see no relationship between the resource server and the client secret. Will you discuss about a refresh token? Maybe, yeah, why not? I didn't prepare anything for today, guys. So when I start a marathon like this, I just take the time to go and go with the flow. So I don't know what I will discuss today. I only know that I will discuss OAuth 2, OpenID Connect, and the way you implement them with Spring. So hopefully that will bring a lot of value. So let me see. I have the client. Now I have the most simplified of the diagrams. So I have a client, I have an authorization server, and the resource server. They are the minimum. Now remember, you might have a user. Okay, so the circle here, let's say this is the user, but remember that in OAuth 2 the users are not mandatory. So there are situations where you only have client, the authorization server, and the resource server. So that's why the user, let's treat it for the moment as being optional. I will explain immediately where exactly it becomes optional. And there are two steps here. No, it's one of the steps is getting authenticated. So when I say getting authenticated, that means either the client or both the client and the user need to authenticate. So, but for single page application, how do we keep the client and secret secured? Well, Kingsley, this is your answer actually. Here you keep them. So the user details and the client details need to be stored at the authorization server side. So the resource server, again, is the backend from which we completely separated the authentication part. So no details about the user or the client will be stored here. So that means no details in terms of no business details, because I also have this kind of question sometimes. But if I have, I don't know, specific cases like the profile picture of the user, can I store the profile picture of the user on the resource server side? Yes, because that might be not related at all to the authentication. And then of course you will probably have to link it somehow to something unique like the email address or a username, whatever, depending on how you create the authentication. So you can have like details related to the business implementation but not to the authentication on the resource server side. But remember that the resource server is the backend from which we have completely separated the authentication. So the user details and the client details will be at the authorization server side. Then the client will have to know and will have to somehow keep the secrets, keep its secrets secure. How you do that, it depends on the technology the client implements. So for example, the client might be a desktop application, so you might simply take them from some system variables where they are injected, or they might be an Android application, then you might store it securely somehow in the operating system. I can't even tell you exactly how the client will store them, because it really depends on the technology, and there are so many technologies out there. So I'm not an expert in all of them. I actually consider myself only an expert in the backend with Java technologies. And then of course this is first step. So authenticating, getting the client and the user being verified by the authorization server. The client says, hey, here is me, this is who I am, and potentially if there is a user, it also says, hey, this is the user, they will prove who they are, so that you can trust us, and then just give us something to prove further that we have authenticated. So the next question is, how does the authorization server provide a way in which the client further can demonstrate that itself and potentially a user, if a user exists, has authenticated? And this is through a piece of data that we call the token. So what actually this provides back is a piece of data which has the usefulness of an access card. So it's just, imagine it as an access card that the client can then use to demonstrate at the backend level that the authentication has indeed been successful. So this is step number 2. Step number 1, which is getting a token, getting an access card, which we call token, okay? And step number 2 is on the backend side, verifying the token is valid and then using it for authorization. I will describe later how that happens. So this token in step number 2 gets to be sent to the resource server, and the resource server, aka our application's backend, will use it, and will use it not only to validate the authentication itself, but also you will see somehow through the token we'll have details that can be used to implement the authorization. So you might have different clients, you might have different users, and these entities might have different privileges, and then the resource server, meaning the backend, will know which are their privileges and will be able to implement authorization rules based on these privileges very easily. So let's see again. So I have a problem I have not been able to solve for 3 days now. Okay, not during this video, so I'm sorry, this video is about something else. I will not solve problems with examples from my books or something like that, so find me in private for that in a separate discussion. And then in case application has lots of data of user, like in case of ecom, where like data address, payment details are not required authentication, what architecture situation what would be that? I don't know. Would you suggest? I can just believe you want a solution. So I was just explaining a bit earlier, and I'm not sure if you were with us already, you might have joined later, that on the authorization server it's mandatory to only store the parts that are related to the authentication itself. So other details which are business related, not authentication related, you could and you should actually store them on the business side, because remember, you might even have different resource servers, totally different applications relying on the same authorization server. We started with that today. So there should not be business things linked, use cases linked to the authorization server. The authorization server should still be only something you use for authentication. Okay, so payment details, in case you have a payment app, should be somewhere on the backend side and not on the authorization server side, because they are not related to authentication. Okay. So why is it called authorization server? We just do authentication. That's a very good point. I like your question very much. I actually get it a lot of times. So the authentication is done at the authorization server side. It's a little bit strange now that you name it authorization, but in the end, it's probably because it also provides all the details for authorization. It doesn't implement the authorization itself, but the details that are used for authorization are provided by it, like the scopes, the roles, the authorities, privileges, or different things that you will put. They will be accessible from the token, but they will also be stored here. So the authorization server, in the end, what it does is authenticates the client and potentially the user if a user exists, and then it also provides all the details needed to implement the authorization. And then the resource server, the backend, definitely it has to implement the rules, and that's because it wouldn't know the authorization server wouldn't know how to implement rules, because they can be related to the business cases, which can be only implemented at the resource server side. So I hope this clarifies your question. So guys, today we only discuss OAuth to OpenID Connect. Any other specific problem, I don't know what page 201 shows in my book. Whatever it is there, please find me separately for a discussion. Okay, I will not answer this kind of questions in this video, which is related to something else. Thank you. So getting back to our discussion, I'm going to take point 1 and point 2 separately, and then I will just implement the apps themselves now, because I want to prove how they work, see what we managed to do. And the question, how will resource server know that token is valid, one given by the authorization server? Again, a very good question. Let's take then point 1 and 2, detail about them a little bit, and you will actually this way figure out also how that happens. So what I want you to remember is that getting an access token is through a process that's called a grant type, and there are multiple such grant types. So there is not only one flow that can be used. In most cases, you will either use, if you have a user, a grant type that's called the authorization code grant type. And if you don't have a user, if what you have is just the client, and the client needs to get a token to access some kind of resource that's not related to a user, then you have a grant type called the client credentials. Other grant types, such as the implicit grant type and the password grant type, are deprecated, and I would prefer not to discuss them in this video since no one recommends anymore their usage. As an idea, the implicit grant type was a simplified grant type of the authorization code. You will see when we run the authorization code grant type that we will not get directly a token out of the box after the authentication, but we will get a different code called the authorization code. Therefore, here's the name of this flow coming from, and then there is one more request happening to get the token. If we would have gotten directly the token, that would have been the implicit grant type, but that one is deprecated for a reason. It is easy to fake redirect, and through a fake redirect have someone getting the token after the authentication and then act on behalf of your user, and you don't want that to happen. And because this is so vulnerable, it's recommended not using it, and instead using the authorization code, which implies one more call to get the token. Now, even the authorization code is enhanced, and we usually use it with an enhancement called PKCE. PKCE meaning proof key for code exchange. I will explain how the authorization code works with and without PKCE, and I will of course recommend you use it with PKCE wherever you can. So avoid using the authorization code without this PKCE that I will explain later. Now, point number 2, verifying the token, the token is valid. So the question was, how does the resource server know that this token is valid? And the answer is, again, it depends. On what does it depends? On what token you have. So surprise, surprise, there is not only one kind of token, even though the majority of the people consider that JVT is the only token. There is a lot of confusion there actually about what JVT is, and hopefully today you will understand what this is, which are its alternatives, and depending on what kind of token you choose, what is also the way in which you can have the resource server validating the token. So is a opaque. That's the first type of the token. It means a token where data, or a token that don't contain any data about client and user, okay? And then B, non-opaque. It's a token that contains data about client and user. And that's where the JVT implementation of the token relies. Now, remember, JVT is an implementation of a non-opaque token, but normally you could implement some other implementation, like you can have why it's called JVT. We will get into that later as well, so don't mind. Sometimes I will tell you things in advance, but JVT as an idea is a token where data inside is formatted using JSON. So JavaScript object notation, normal JSON. You might have a token that formats data as XML, for example. That would be an XML web token. Of course, normally, most likely you'll never see something like that. I don't see any reason why someone would choose to use a different implementation than the JWT. But just as an idea, remember that the classification of the tokens is not in JVT and opaque, and the JVT is not the only kind of token. JVT is just a token implementation. It's a token implementation with a characteristic of being non-opaque, meaning that it contains data, and you will see later that how JWT works actually is that it contains the data structured as JSON, and then for simplicity of being transferred over web requests, HTTP requests, it also is base64 encoded. So that's what a JWT token is. But now, to answer the question properly up to the end, if you have an opaque token, then it doesn't contain any data, so the resource server still has to take that data from somewhere to implement authorization. It needs to know who the client is and who potentially the user is, if there is a user, and more things about them that could be related to the privileges they have. So until the resource server has all this, it won't be able to apply authorization rules. And to get this, when you have an opaque token, you need to make introspection. Introspection is the process in which the resource server calls the authorization server to ask it about whether a token is valid or not, and details about that token. Now, introspection is mandatory when you have opaque tokens, so without introspection, the resource server can't know either that the token is valid or which are the details it needs for applying the authorization. So this is the introspection code, which we will even test later. Now, if you have non-opaque token, then there are ways to do that without introspection. For example, with the JWT is a token that also uses a signature. So it has a header, then a body. The header and the body, they all contain claims, meaning the data structured as JSON, and then at the end you have a signature. The signature is basically a computation, a result of a computation using a cryptographic algorithm over the header and the body as input, that if someone changes any of the data in the token, will not correspond, will not be the same anymore. So what happens is that the resource server now can validate the token solely by verifying the signature, because what it can do is verify if the header and the body generate or apply to the same signature. So the signature, if the signature fulfills, corresponds with the input, then it means that the token is valid and it hasn't been altered meanwhile throughout the it being transferred between the entities. If the signature is not okay anymore, then it means that the token might have been altered, and then the resource server considers it invalid. Moreover, the header and the body contain data. No? Which data? Exactly the data one needs for the authorization rules. So data about the client and potentially the user, if a user exists. And then that might be enough to validate everything without having introspection. However, some of you guys asked me about token revocation a little bit earlier. Token revocation is a process in which the token can be revoked, meaning making it invalid after it has already been issued. Why would you do something like that? Maybe because, for example, you consider that the token has been stolen somehow, and maybe it's now used by someone who you'd not want it to be able to use it, and then what you can do is revoke it. If you want to add to your system the revocation capability, then you still need to use introspection even with non-opaque tokens, because this way, this is the only way in which you can find out that the token, for example, has been revoked. So depending on how you implement, introspection might or not be needed. For opaque token is definitely always needed. For non-opaque tokens it might be or might not be needed, depending on exactly what capabilities you wish your system has. So let's see more questions. Can we expect an innovation of the security book? It's already in progress. You can access the early access on Manning for that. What are the advantages of opaque tokens over non-opaque tokens? Another very good question. Thank you for that. So opaque tokens don't contain the information, but that's not necessarily its biggest advantage, because, well, usually what you send over a token is not sensitive anyway, so it's not that a big deal. Maybe you could say that an opaque token hides the details, because you will never see them on the wire between the client and either the authorization server or the resource server. So yes, that could be one advantage that I hear a lot of people see as the first. In my perspective, the opaque token is actually more advantageous in case you have a lot of details related to authentication, a big amount of data that's related to the authentication, and you want to transfer it. Why is that? Because, well, it's never advisable you have large non-opaque tokens, large JVT tokens, for example. Remember that they are always sent in the header throughout the request. So the larger they are, the more throughput they need. And secondly, the larger they are, the more time the signature would take. So it might even lead to some specific performance issues if you have large JVT tokens. So the purpose of the JVT is to be as small as possible. But if you really have this situation where you end up, for some reason, I never got into something like that in practice, honestly, but if you would get to that case where you have large JVTs and you see that they impact the way the system works, they impact the performance, then you might go back and rely to opaque tokens, which are always very small. And then the only call that would have to retrieve the large amount of data would be the introspection, but that's only at the backend level between the resource server and the authorization server. So you will not have any more exchange of large amount of data between the authorization server and the client. Okay, so with revocation, resource server has to issue a request to the authorization server for each and every token. Yes, I mean, it has to actually validate somehow that the token was or wasn't revoked. So that is one solution, the introspection. There is the second solution of having a blackboarding approach, but usually blackboardings, that means shared schemas on the database level, are avoided in practice. Which means of heavy cost? Yes, very good point. So I see a lot of very good points and questions already concerning you. So because then the developers asked me, hey, does that mean that revocation is something that we should use in our system, or we should avoid? And the question is always, it depends, because that's software architecture, that's what makes it difficult. There will always be compromises you have to make. See, you discover now how a real architect thinks. A real architect is always deciding. And by the way, I think I have a discussion there in a playlist only about software architecture fundamentals. One of the most important things is, remember, you will always have to make the right compromises. So it's like thinking about, should I have more security or should I have more performance? The cost will be somewhere. So you can't avoid, there is no perfect system. There will always be the perfect system per case. So you have a very expensive thing to protect, no? Like the Mona Lisa painting. If you have the Mona Lisa painting and have to protect it, then it makes sense. Like in Paris, in Louvre, where it's stored, you have a lot of cameras, you have a lot of expensive security systems, you have like a protective glass over it, that can't be even broken by shooting at it with a gun. So see, it's a very, very expensive protection for that, but that's because it makes sense, because you protect one of the most valuable paintings in the world. But if you have like to protect, I don't know, your shovel from the garden, you can just put it like on your near your door or something like that, and then you don't actually need to invest a lot into protecting your shovel or other gardening tools. So that's because they are not that expensive, so it's very unlikely someone will steal it because it won't gain a lot from that. So when you decide how to implement security, you also have to decide it, like, should I invest the cost or shouldn't I invest the cost? So that's how we do it. Is there some recommendation for the max size of a JSON Web Token? I don't have like a number. I can't say it's like 1253 bytes or something like that. I think this is something you can decide by observing how it affects your system, rather than saying, hey, this is the right size of a JVT. How I do it, I would see if it affects my system in terms of performance. Now, it's usually clear that if you have like something like a large piece of data in a claim, then that's where you might have a concern and try to profile your application and see how much that big piece of data affects your performance. But if you don't have something like that, like if you only have the usual claims, roles, authorities, the timestamp and stuff like that, then you probably don't have any concern anyway about that. So can the resource server calculate when it gets the token? What type is that token to know how to handle the token? Yes, it can. Yeah, yes, it can, and it's actually the thing is, you might even have situations where you use multiple authorization servers, and you have one authorization server that uses opaque tokens and the other non-opaque tokens, and you can implement that. Yeah, you can really even implement something like that. So now what I'd like to do is I'd like to build together with you. So I know you guys usually get bored if you don't see code. So now, if the things that we discussed are clear, and they are hopefully like more clear now than they used to be from what I've heard in my Spring Security playlist, let's start by implementing the two backend things, two backend responsibilities. So we will create two separate applications, and in these applications, the authorization server and the resource server, we discuss about whatever we have theoretically talked about until now. So let's go and say OAuth to marathon. And say E1, which will be my authorization server. I will then move it to a different folder, and I will make sure that all these are available to you. So I will make sure that I will put them like usually on my GitHub, so you don't have to necessarily write this together with me or copy them from the screen, because you will have them like in a comment after the session, and you will be able to take them from there. So I will build a web application. Now let's decide. So with this, I'd like to be able to demonstrate both the authorization code and the client credentials runtime. So that means I will have users as well. So what will my authorization server manage? Well, it will manage actually clients and users. And to make things even more interesting, let's actually put these details in a database as well. Okay, so let's do that. So I will create a Spring web application, and then In Spring Boot 3.1, the Start Spring IO still doesn't contain a reference to the Authorization Server dependency, so I will have to put it by hand. But then if I want to use a database, I will have to add all the dependencies I need for the database, and one of these will be the MySQL driver in my case, because I will be using a MySQL database. If I want to use Spring Data JPA, let's say Hibernate behind the scenes, let's do that. What else would I need? Well, I know a lot of people are not fans of Lombok, but honestly with JPA, with JPA, it helps a lot with getting rid of the setters and the getters. So I will actually also add Lombok to my set of dependencies. If you don't like using it, then don't use it. It's not it's for me only a tool. It's not something I hate, but not something I love either. So it's just a tool that I use from time to time, and I of course only use it when I find that's necessary. Remember that even with records on the scene starting with Java 17, you will still not be able to use records with JPA entities, because JPA entities need to be mutable by definition, so you will not be able to make them using records which are designed to be immutable. Okay, so and let's create. Oh, it just went on a different screen. Okay, here it is. And then I will also add the authorization server dependency. And that's it. Okay, still takes some time to synchronize. Meanwhile, I can directly go here, and I think the font is a little bit too large, isn't it? I had it like this for my presentations, because sometimes the rooms are very large and people from behind can't see the code, but for you guys here, I think that we might make a good use of a smaller font, like 18 for example. Okay, and a lot of people usually ask me why don't I use a black screen like the Darkula theme and stuff like that. And I say I don't use that because with presentations text on white is a lot better when you put it on the big screen, so that's why I don't use it. Anyway, so OAuth to Authorization Server is the starter. The starter is here with Spring Boot 3.1.0, so unless you have this Spring Boot version, you have to add the dependency from Spring Security, which would be the same thing, but since I'm using the latest version, so I can use Spring Boot 3.1.0. So let's actually reload the project one more time for that. Okay. Okay, so fine enough, and now we can basically start our implementation. Well, remember that we decided to put the details in a database, so that means, so config, I think it's the first time I do this actually here with you, so I hope it will work, because I haven't tested this before. But you will help me, I'm pretty sure, find out if I have any problems, finding out how to solve them. So let's start with the usual filter security, let's say a minimal filter security for the beginning, and then we deal with client setup, and then we will deal with the user setup. And let's say we start with opaque tokens for the sake of the example, and then we move to JVD tokens. That should take a lot of time. Hopefully I will have my voice here for you to finish all this demonstration and discuss all these topics, including revocation. And I see your messages. So let's see what we can do. So public security filter chain, and I need first of all to define the authorization server filter chain. I will name it like this. Okay, so returning it, use the build method to build it from the HTTP security bin, throw the exception, and of course remember to add the bin add notation to put it in the Spring context. Guys, for this maybe I should have started by saying this, but for this video I do expect people watching to already have some basics on both Spring and Spring security, because this is a lot more higher than that. So I will not be able to explain everything that's Spring security related in this video, in this marathon. But if you don't have the fundamentals, remember that there are playlists out there that I created for you with all the details you need, like to be a professional in Spring and Spring security, and they are for free there for you. So you can first go on and make sure you have those, and then come back to this video. I don't want this to become frustrating for you because you don't understand the stuff, because sometimes, you know, if you skip over things and you try understanding stuff that is more complex, it can be frustrating. So in case it looks like new stuff what I'm doing here, you might want to first make sure that you have the prerequisites. Okay, what do I do here is, in this filter I will apply the default security configuration. Fortunately, this is something that has been packed in a static method, and you can do it by simply calling the apply default security method. Moreover, I do expect that in future versions of Spring Boot, this will actually become the convention configuration. So the whole bin that I'm writing here, you might not need to create it at all. So it will be part of what Spring Boot does for you. Now remember, we are in very early stages of the authorization server. This piece of software that I'm using now to implement this capability has actually been released somewhere in November 2022, which is at the moment about half a year ago. Half a year is not that much. So you see, Spring Boot still didn't have the chance yet to have it all. So that means that I have to do some work by myself, some work that maybe in the future will not be needed. I do have to apply the default security by calling the static method, and then if I want to not only use OAuth 2 but also apply the OpenID Connect to have, for example, URLs like the default well-known URLs for the info for the OpenID Connect to give me all the details, then I do have to get this default configuration, which I can do by the get configurer method. Configurer, somewhere here it should be. Okay, and then what I did here on this line 17 is I took the default configuration so that then I can customize it further. So for example, I can customize it by using the OpenID Connect, but there are other things as well that you can do, like for example, if you wish to customize the validations on the authorization endpoint or any other endpoint. So see, you can basically customize it completely from here. So you can actually they have been defined, and my knowledge is that they have been defined according to the specification. But if you really want to change it, like do something special when the authorization endpoint is called or when the token endpoint is called, modify the consent service, the logic behind the scenes and stuff like that, then what you can do is use any of these methods and with the customizer modify it according to what you want. I will keep on using the defaults, because it's very difficult now. Even if I would try to implement something special, it's difficult to understand what corner case you'd have to implement in a specific application. But just for you to know that if that's needed, you can actually do that. So let's see, I see some more messages. Let me read them and see where you have any question. Get a token. Is there any direct implementation available to invalidate the first token after generate the second? I'm not sure exactly if I understood the case, but I will see when discussing the revocation if I did. I have said that it's only concerned with authorization, while OpenID is concerned with authentication. I'm not sure if Gianluigi, if your understanding is correct. OAuth 2 is basically the framework. OpenID Connect is just a protocol that restricts the framework. Both of them are related to both authentication and authorization. So I'm not sure where you have read that, but I don't think it's right what you have read, or at least it doesn't sound right to me. So normally just imagine like this. Imagine you have a framework and it's too flexible, okay? Like for example with the electrical outlets, with sockets. All over the world you have 3 wires in a socket. One of them provides the phase, the other is a null, and then you have the grounding. But unfortunately this is only the specification. Because you don't have a protocol, every socket can look differently, and that's why in the UK you have a different kind of an outlet than in the US, than in Europe, and then in China, and then in Australia. Okay, so there are different types of electrical outlets. All of them fulfill the same specification, but they are different protocols. So what a protocol is restricting the specification so that you don't need adapters to use it. So that's exactly with OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect. Imagine OAuth 2 is the specification, but if you use it as is, one can implement it in one way and another one in another way, and then if you need to make them compatible, you need to make adapters in between them. While what OpenID Connect does is to restrict a bit the specification such that if one applies OpenID Connect, it doesn't need adapters in between the implementations. So theoretically, if we use OpenID Connect as implementing an authorization server, anyone would be able to use your authorization server without needing to create customized things to adapt it. So I hope my analogy makes it a little bit clear. Okay, and one thing I need, so because I decided here to show you also the authorization code grant type. Now I said we discussed the authorization code grant type. If we want that, it means we have users. If we have users, it means we need to allow them login. So what happens in that case, let me actually close this window to have a little bit more memory. What actually that means is that we would have to configure in a way the fact that if someone calls unauthenticated other endpoints of your authorization server, you'd like them to be redirected to the login. So fortunately that should be easily possible to do with an authentication entry point. And here is where we'll actually say hey, redirect anyone to log in if they don't if they didn't correctly provide the authentication. So and that's because we will implement form login, and that's because we have users. So that's basically it. And now what I will do is I will write separately the filter chain of my application, which let's say I'm naming it app filter chain. And remember that I do that because I want to separate the configuration of the authorization server that might in the future become also convention from the app itself, from from what I will implement configuring the app itself. Okay, here it is. And then, because there are two, I will have to put in the order annotation. So I will not create a default login page because I'm not a front-end dev, so sorry. That would be possible, like to configure it when you say something like HTTP and then you say form login, then what I will do is I will say customizer with defaults, and that will use the default login page. If I would have liked to create my custom login page rendered on the server side, then first of all, if I wanted it to be rendered on the server side, then I would need probably a dependency to allow that to make it easier, like time leaf, which I didn't add to my dependencies. Secondly, I would have to actually configure it through the configurer itself and specify who is the login page, like basically using this login page method and providing the right URL for it. This is honestly not related to what we discussed today. So first of all, I'm not really comfortable with writing myself front-end stuff. Secondly, it's not that related to OAuth 2. Maybe it's more to like Spring Security, but not to OAuth 2 directly. So I would not want to lose time with that. So that's why I will say customizer with defaults. Okay. And then, of course, there are a lot of things you want probably to implement here, but again, we can just go and for the moment take the minimal, like the authentication. Okay. And can we point the login URL to a different server? Well, I don't think that actually makes sense, no, because we are now building the server whose responsibility is to log in. So why would you redirect this to another application if this application is the one that has the exact responsibility of logging in? So can you redirect to another page? Yes, you can. How would you then log in? I have no idea. So most likely something doesn't make sense here. So I would say probably the answer is I'm not sure if that makes any sense. Okay. So basically that would be what you need to have the endpoints, but that's and of course there is one more thing, sorry, is the authorization server settings. Okay, that would allow you to customize if you want the endpoints, but we will still leave it as a default. Okay, now that's what builds the mechanism behind the scenes. But if you don't have either clients or users, then this server can't do anything. So what I wrote here builds your endpoints that you can call. If you don't have whom to authenticate, then this doesn't make a lot of sense. So that simply means we created a useless application unless we define the client management at least, which would allow us to use the client grant type, and then because we said we want to also demonstrate how the authorization code grant type works, you would need to have also users managed. So normally we use the register client repository bean to manage the clients, no? And you have seen me already in a lot of videos, like on using that new in-memory register client repository. So what I want today is skip over that and try to implement myself the register client repository so that I can store my clients in a database. See? So if I want that, then I have to decide at least what exactly do I need for my schema. And to be honest, I can create even a quite complex schema if I want to put them in the right way, or I can simplify it, like create only one table that has everything I need. Let's see. Let's try to create it a little bit more complex. See if it works for us. So what would we actually need? I need a database. No, I actually have a database demo here. It's empty. So let's take it from the very beginning. The simplest point here is that I can create my data source. So let's just put the data source. And the username and password, which in my case on the local computer they are just root without a password. And then I need some tables, no? So what tables do I need? I would say I need a clients table. So I have an ID, I will make it auto incremented. I have a client ID and I have a client secret. I will use the no password encoder for simplicity, because if I would use a big bicrypt password encoder, then I would also need to create an endpoint to add the clients. And to be honest with you guys, I don't think that I will resist that much in this marathon, and then I don't want to like leave this not implemented up to the end. But maybe in one of the future videos, if you can't manage yourself to change this, like I can give it to you as a homework, please change this to use the bicrypt password encoder, and then maybe we can try to do that in a separate video, or if I will have enough energy, maybe I will do it today, but we'll see. So then what else do I need? So I need the authentication. Is the authentication something that we can put in here? Most likely yes. So it's only one authentication, so you can't have more than one, so then it probably makes sense to be here. And then what else would we need? So we'll have, let me actually maybe put it in a notepad, because it makes things easier. So I said clients, and then the clients would have an ID, client ID, secret, authentication. Then I would actually have the redirect URLs table, ID, URL for the client. And then what else do I need? I need the scopes, ID, scope, or ID, yeah, scope is okay, client. Normally maybe between clients and scopes we'd have had a many-to-many relationship, but let's not complicate it, overcomplicate it. Still just an example. I don't want to end up with too many tables. What else do we have? So we have grant types, of course. So grant types, ID, grant type, and then client again, probably I would normally have a many-to-many relationship here, so I will simplify it to one-to-many. So I have scopes, grant types, authentication, I put it here, the client credentials, sounds, whatever we need sounds this way. So I will just apply this one, so create the first table, and then I will create a table redirect URLs. So it would be ID, URL. I'm not sure how long a URL should be, but let's put enough space here for the URL. And then say client ID, which will be the foreign key to the client table. Okay. And then we'd have the scopes, ID, scope I said, and client ID, which will be the foreign key. Here it is. Okay, normally I need also indexes in the database, guys. I will skip over that as well, but yeah, it's just for the demonstration purposes. Grant types, and the grant types, which would also be basically normally many-to-many, because you have some grant types and then you need a joint table, but to make it simpler, we can put it like this and say client ID. Okay, can we add some data as well? So we say ID 1 client secret authentication basic. Should we put it like this? Basic. And then define an enum for that. And then grant types. So we might say we want the authorization code grant type for client 1. And then we also want the client credentials also for client 1. And then we need to define a redirect URL, at least one, yeah. So it's one, the URL would be example.com, which should be normally one URL of your application, and you can have more URLs. And then scope, you might have any scope. I will add the classic OpenID one, but you might have multiple if you need. And that should be a minimum configuration, no? And yeah, more than this, what you can do in your apps later is separate this as being client to grant types, client redirect URLs, and clients to scopes as many-to-many instead of one-to-many relationships. And let's see if we can get them. No, that actually makes me going back and create some entities package here. So what I have is the client, then I need to use the table annotation because I named it clients, so the table name differs. And then I need to have the ID. In my case, I set it as auto-generated. And then private string client ID. And then private string secret. And what else do we have? Authentication, I guess. That's interesting. So how do we put it with the authentication? Say authentication. Let me actually see what the register client actually wants there. So if I'd create a register client, say registered client C, with ID, and I'd have to put the authentication method. So this one's a client authentication method, which unfortunately is a class, so I don't have a way to map it. Fine, that's not a big deal. I could have actually used in the database directly this value and create my client authentication method, so that could have been a way to avoid having a mapper, or I can have a mapper. So I don't think it actually I think we can do that. Like let's actually do that. No, instead of having a mapper, just put here the but question, is it actually public? Can I? Oh yes, it is public, so I can actually create my own authentication method easily. So then the easiest way in that case would actually really be to use here like this string. And then I will easily take it from the database and directly create it. Okay, makes sense. So that would be one of the things. Then client, and then that should only be private string authentication, or whatever I named it. So authentication. Okay. And then yeah, if you don't want to use Lombok, then generates your getters and setters. Otherwise you can generate them like this, and that would be the client one. And then which is the next that we have to implement? The next is grant types. Okay, which is my entity. And then again I have to map it, so ID grant type, and I will make then the relationship. So private client, and grant type has one client, the client has more grant types, so that would be client, and that would be a many to one. So the only thing I need to set here, and I don't actually need to set anything here, no. On the other side, however, I'd go to private list of grant types, and specify that this is one client to many, and then mapped by, and the name of the field here. Okay, and I think that should be it. So if I want where the user ID in my token, where it should be stored on the client side, in authentication or principal, I don't know if I understood. So if I want to add the user ID in my token, where it should be stored on the client side. If you want to have it in your token, it should be somewhere from the authorization server side, not the client side. So, or maybe you wanted to say like here in the tables, where should you edit it? I'm not sure, sorry, I didn't understand the question. Okay, so what would be the next table I want to implement? The next table is redirect URLs. So let's create the entity. Oh, sorry, entity. Again, generated value, strategy, identity, private string URL, and same to the grant type. It belongs to a client, so let's put it like this. And then in the client again, have another relationship, but this time on the redirect URL, and that should be it. And then the last one that we designed is the scopes, which is again very similar. So we'll create a class scope, make it my entity, the name of the column is scope, and then it will be basically the same as for the others. And this actually looks like a minimal representation of the data in the database and mapped accordingly here. For this I also need getters and setters, so let's remember to either generate them or use the Lombok annotations. Okay, and that should be it. And now I will create a separate package, repositories. Okay, and that would be client repository. And since I'm using Spring Data, I only need to create an interface which extends from one of the Spring Data contracts. I can use the JPA repository contract, but you can as well have used the CRUD repository or the paging and sorting one. Now, since I know I use JPA, I can go to the most particular one, say client, and then integer. Because what I need now, and be careful when you import them from the correct package. What I need now is actually to create a client service, and that one should actually represent the repository. So let me see how I explain that. So that should be sorry, new package services. And client service. It's a little bit strange, I know, because I create a class client service and then I implement the registered client repository. Now normally the registered client repository, so it has the save of the registered client and the others, but I cannot like really simply make it a repository, because for me a repository here will be more related to the database. So actually the registered client repository will be somehow in between what the service is and the repository is in my case. So I will just implement it as a service this way. I can do that. If I use the service annotation, then I can just go here and completely remove this bin, so I don't even need to have it at all. And the client service here will have to like override the 3 methods and then adapt what I have in the database, so what I will take from the database as client entities to the registered client, and that's basically it. So that's what will hopefully solve my client management. And then of course in this case, for simplicity, I decided to use the no password encoder, but you can use any password encoder as long as you make sure that you also add the passwords in the correct hash, as the correct hash encryption in the database. So let's start with the no. If time allows, we can change it to a bcrypt later. Remember, no password encoder is marked as deprecated, not because it's deprecated, but because it's something you should only use in tutorials and demonstrations, so never in real world, because the no op password encoder, as the name suggests, it doesn't do any operation on the password. So that means it doesn't it doesn't encrypt anyhow your password. Okay, so let's see what happens further. Okay, so now I can go and say register client. So do I save the register client? To save it, I must change this to a client of mine. So I have to, from a registered client, to have a client see new client. And basically that will help me. So I can go here and say private final client repository. Okay, and then save it. Of course I don't want to save it empty, so what I want to do is set some of the things from from here. So set ID, I don't need to set an ID because I will have it auto generated, but set client ID then will come from here, get client ID, and then I will have to go with all this secret, and then it will be registered client, get client secret, then authentication, and then it will be registered client, get client authentication methods. Oh, this can be multiple as well. Look at this. So I didn't realize that they can also be multiple. So anyway, I will not change the schema in my database anymore. I had the impression that you can only have one per client, but it seems that you can have multiple per client, which is good in the end. It should be this way. Now how do we do? Because if we have this set and we want to get only one, I think the easiest is say stream and then take take one, no, limit to one, something like that. Okay, but that's a little bit ugly, I know, so it's only for demonstration purposes. Normally I should have actually created a new table. Let's actually do that, because it's pretty awful. No, I don't like it. So I don't like it. I want to be like, it's not perfect anyway, but at least to be as close as possible, since we have this marathon together here. Okay, and then create the table, and then I would say, so authentication methods by ID, authentication method. Not sure how much would be enough here actually. And then client ID, no, the foreign key. But that means I have to actually delete the authentication column from the client table instead. I took it from here. Okay, I took this column from here, and I have created a separate table for that with a relationship, since we have more possibilities. Okay, okay, and then I can actually delete this. How do I delete this? I think I can go with like this, authentication something, come on. Yeah, funny enough, alter table. Okay, so I will delete it completely. Alter table, drop column, and then instead, so this is how it looks like, and then instead I'm going to authentication methods here and say one, and then I will copy the name of the authentication method exactly as the registered client wants it. So this is it, and I assign it to client one, and then you now can have multiple if you'd like. Yeah, okay, good. But now this is a little bit more realistic, isn't it? Because then I should be able now to set multiple. So set oh yeah, of course the data model doesn't comply anymore, so I will have to add one more entity as well. So I say client directly authentication method, entity table name authentication methods. Okay, and then of course ID, choose the name of the column, authentication method. Okay, method, and then of course the link to the client, which we can make the same way as for the others. and then that means the client here will not have only one authentication, but a list of authentication methods. And then that means in the service here, I'll just have to say set authentication methods. Now this receives a list. So what I need to do is I need to get from the registered client the client authentication methods from this set and map every object, so it will be mapped somehow, okay, and then collected, in my case, to a list. Okay, but the map should be a map that changes from the registered client from the client authentication method to my authentication method. So what I would do actually, I would go here to the authentication method, and we can create something like public static authentication method from client authentication method, and then say what exactly, authentication method A, which I need to return, and that would be a set, and getters and setters, of course. Cool. A set authentication method get value, I guess it's the one. So get the value, it's exactly the value. Okay, that makes sense. And then of course I think it should be also correctly mapped. So if I'm where was it? Here it is. So the only other thing, so the ID is fine for the save. I think the client would be a little bit more of a problem because you need to set this up as well. It can't be it can't simply be. So let's see how we actually do it. I think the only way would be to actually have one more parameter here, but normally probably I would think now about extracting this to a mapper class or something. For the sake of losing less time now, because it's a demonstration, I think we can leave it like this. But normally, probably I would feel more comfortable to extract this in a class for the readability, for the maintainability, and so on and so forth. Yeah, exactly. So I see your message. It was exactly what I said. So yes, this is only for saving time. So your comment is exactly what I was now thinking about. Sometimes I even feel a bit guilty that I'm doing something like that, because I know it's not really. I mean, now you have only 4 rows and maybe it doesn't look so ugly. But if you do that in a real world app, you might end up with an ugly static method, which is also difficult to test. So normally what I would do is separating this in a class, exactly as you say. Cool. So that's very true. Yeah. So now I can say authentication method from something like that. So from actually, so what do I do here? I do get actually no, it's not working like this because I have 2 parameters. Sorry, so I forgot about the client parameter. So yeah, indeed. So let's be C, not C because C is already taken. A from A and C. Okay. So that should be it for now. And see, it's ugly. So that's why I avoid doing something like this usually. So it would have looked much better with the separate class, at least from my perspective. What else? So then we will do the same now for the grant types. and then for the scopes and the redirect URLs. So we still have a few things to do here, so map them. Okay, so grant types. Grant types. Register client get authorization grant type. It's a set, and we'll do basically the same thing. We'll stream it. We'll have to map it to our grant type. So we'll have something like public static. What was the type exactly here? Okay. Oh, so it's the other way around. It's actually grant type from and client. So now you define the grant type, which you will return in the end. And which will populate with the value and the client. Now you can basically say the same, so it's stream map to something like that. Okay, and then collectors to list, and then the same for the redirect URIs. Unfortunately, these are already strings. I still actually need to map them to a redirect URI. So I still need to make here a static method. From string and client. Okay, so that is now redirect from URL and client. And then the last one is the scopes, and then we finish with the save method, hopefully. Okay, normally I think you'd have some transactional, of course, as well, even if it's only one operation here. You can even better, you can do transactional read-only true, and then this one will make transactional, and then the others will remain read-only true because it's only find operations. So you can do something like that. And then the scopes, the last ones are the scopes. Get scopes, again a set of strings, and again a same thing here. So public static scope from string scope client. Okay, so finally I can now stream it, map it from scope to scope from C and collect it to list. Okay, and that would be the save operation. Okay. This one, all of it, if you ask me, can be taken out. So look how much code is here. So this method doesn't stay inside one screen, and when it doesn't stay inside one screen, it makes it difficult to read. So even this code can be taken in a separate class normally. So remember, in tutorials and demonstrations, you will not see always people caring about all the quality of the code, but normally in a real world application you need to consider all this. So whenever I see something like this, I wouldn't just leave it the way it is. Maybe later, once we finish with the today's today's example which relates to OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect, I will create maybe a separate video to see how we can clean up an application that we didn't say from the beginning, design very wisely. That would be a nice thing, I guess, to do. Yeah, anyway, client repositories. Now find by ID, and the find by ID is, you see, it comes as a string, but we have it as an integer, so I think it should be easily parse of the ID in our case. And find by ID gives us an optional client here, and then of course we have to map it to a register client. So here we will have to do the opposite, from the client map it, or throw an exception if we didn't find that. I'm not even sure what kind of exception should here be, but it will be a runtime exception for sure. So I can simply just say client map to, and then I need something to map it to a registered client, and then or else throw. Okay, with a clear message in the end normally. And then let's see how we do with this map here. I think in the client class we can do something like public client. So that in the end you can go here and say just client register client. So you get a client and it returns a register client. No? Client. Oh, from it was the name of the method. Okay, or even better, from register client. See, it's a compromise here, because if you don't give the name, so from register client, then if you use it with the two-colon operator, the one to reference a method, then you don't know here from what, you know. So it's much easier to read in this case, client from register client, this way. If you name, because at some point when you name the method, yeah, it might look not useful to add this type here, type name here in the method name, because you already have the return type. but it depends also on how you use the method, because if you use it like this, then here it would be much more difficult to read if the name is like this rather than if the name is like this. Okay, that's another story, I guess. So now basically we would have the same thing here, no? Just that here it's by client ID, so we would need from client. Yeah, you're right. So sorry, my mistake. I think I already from client. Yeah, I'm already becoming tired a bit. It was a long couple of weeks for me, guys. So I was a couple of weeks ago at Spring IO in Barcelona, and last week I was in Yash. So I'm quite tired, but I decided not to cancel this this event. So client ID would be here, and then what we need is, now we need a method to get by client ID, and we don't have something like this, or we don't have it yet, so we have to build it. So optional client find by, I would say find by client ID. Okay, string client ID. And then usually, even if the method name theoretically should be enough here, because Spring Data, if you correctly write the method names with the way Spring Data expects the names, then it already works. But I do usually prefer and recommend developers to write the query. So say select C from client C, where client ID is the provided by parameter client ID. So that is going back, that would be find by client ID. So now I should only implement this from client method, and my whole client service should be fine, and then we can further go to the user management, and then if everything works well, I think that would actually create our authorization server, so we can test it with the authorization code grant type at least. Okay, so from client, so how do we do that? So registered client, it's basically what we return here. Let's see if it works like that. With ID client, and this is not a client ID, yeah? This is the ID itself. So get ID, but we need to make a string value of, because this expects it as a string. CID, I don't understand that, so I think let me go back. So from client ID is client ID. It looks fine because here we really search by the client ID. So this one is find by ID from the ID, and the second one is find by client ID from client ID. So for me it looks okay. I'm not sure if did I make any other mistake here? No, I don't think. So it looks good. Or maybe I will find later that I did. Anyway, and now let's fill it in with, so I would say what, client ID, and then say client get client ID, and then secret, and then client get secret, and then authentication. And now the point is that you have more. So if you have more, you have to decide whether you want to store them like this with a consumer of a set. That would be C, and then here we would, it's a consumer of a set, yeah, set. So I need to somehow provide here the set. Okay, let's go with only one. I think authentication method, just to be simpler now, and we can change it later. So that would be get the first, which we know it should exist. This is a method, okay, and this is the value. So this is client authentication method, what it wants here. So am I missing? I guess I'm missing one more parenthesis. That's it. Okay. And then the grant type. So the grant type would be I'm not really sure that I should actually create this consumer of set of authorization grant types instead, because if I don't do that, then I don't have a chance to like have multiple grant types. No, so I really have to do that, and I think I will do the same then for the other. So would that be easier if I create a private static method for the beginning and say gives me a consumer of a set of, what were they here, authorization grant type? So that would be the authorization grant types. And then just put it like this, like that. And then the question is, where do I get this from? So I still need at least the list of grant types, not the list of grant types, which I can then provide it like this. And then what I return is the set in which I go through the grant types and then I add to the set a new authorization grant type of that specific grant type, something like that. And then what I can do is the same for this one here, so it looks a little bit nicer. So I can say private static consumer of a set of, go back, methods, and then I can have multiple, no, of client authentication method. Okay, and then this goes here. And then of course from the client I still need the list of authentication methods, which I changed from the database to what the authorization server wants, so something like that. And then for each authentication method from the authentication methods list, add a client authentication method with that specific name. And that also means that we stored them in the database with the same format name, because if we didn't do that, then it will not work definitely. And what else? So we have the scopes. Okay, and you see the pattern here. So they actually made them all the same. So in a way this is very nice. It's wise, because the set of string, I think, is this one. No, it's a set of string. And then that would be the scopes. And again, most likely here we need to get the string of scope, the list of scopes from the database. So that's from the client, the scopes. And there is one thing that we still need to do. It's in the sorry, it's a list of actually of scope in our database. One thing that we need to do for sure, and because otherwise it will not work the way we did it, is in the client where we have the lists. We need to make sure that this information is fetched at the time of fetching the client. So I will use the fetch attribute to get all of this for this specific client when the client is loaded, because otherwise most likely what will happen is that the authorization server will try to reuse the session, the Hibernate session, which will not be available anymore, and it will fail with an exception. So that's basically what one of the things we can do is make sure we eagerly consume all of these values, because collections in JPA implementations such as Hibernate are by default lazily loaded. So for scope in scopes, add that specific scope. So we have the client ground type scopes, and there was one more thing, the redirect URIs. And we will do it similarly. No, eager is not the default actually. Eager is definitely not the default. In any JPA implementation, all the collections have fetched lazy by default. So if you want to be eager, you have to do it explicitly, okay? Okay, so that will be a column missing here. And then return redirect URIs. And I have, of course, a list of redirect URL. So here it will be redirect URIs of client get redirect URLs, and then for and then it's a r add you get URL. Okay, and I think that is everything. Now I know someone asked me at some point, like the last couple of weeks, is whether can we add the token settings or the client settings as well, and I said yes, you can do that. And I'm not sure what was the concern, because I understood that the guy faced some difficulties with adding the client settings. Now remember, the client settings and the token settings, you can, like, you put them like this. You might simply have a separate table if you want, and you can have the token settings and the client settings the same way as we did with the scopes and so on and stuff like that. So for example, let's do that with the token settings, just to make sure that I clarify that question as well. How do we store, like, in the database, the life of the access token and the type of the access token? Can we do that? And the answer is yes, you can do that. Like, for example, you might have a different table here called token settings, no? So let's put the token settings. Which token settings? Let's say access token time to leave. Let's say this is an int in number of hours, and then type, token type, which can be reference or JVT. And any other settings you'd need, you can put them here. Oh, sorry for that. Would also need to have the client ID. No, it's the foreign key. And then we can operate again on our entities. Okay, and this would be my entity. Name is token settings. And then this is the name of the column. And this is the type. Oh, and by the way, I think we should actually add for our client one. So say for client one, access token time to leave 5 hours. Type of the token, reference I think is the type, the name of the type, but we will check it in the code to be sure. Okay. So that is type client ID, and then it goes the same with a many-to-one. No, it's actually a many-to-one. It's actually a one-to-one because the in that case, no, it's a many-to-one. It's a one-to-one, I think, no, because you would have the client. I don't even need actually. If I have a one direction, it should be enough for the client. So it should only be like private client token settings, in this case client token settings, and one-to-one. No, and I'm on the opposite, I think, here of the relationship, no, because the join is that way, so that would be mapped by client here. Okay, I think that should be it, hopefully. And then of course, having the token settings, then you can do the same with the others. So say token settings builder build, and then the time to leave would be client get token settings get time to leave. Of course, duration of something, no, duration of days, of hours would be, in my case, duration of hours, because we said we have as many hours. And then the format, which comes as OAuth to token format here, which has one of the values self-contained or reference. See, we put reference, so it's okay. Let's make it small letters, because I'm not sure if they compare it with equals or equals ignore case. But the only thing we need to do is create this object for the type from the database. So client token settings, get type. Yes, that was it. Okay. Okay, one-to-one. Yes, did I put it wrongly? No, one-to-one. It's okay. So one-to-one and one-to-one. So every token has only one settings. Yeah. Any settings belong to only one token. That sounds good for me. And what sounds even better is that I added here the service. So now theoretically everything related to the client management is done. So the only thing I need to do further is to create the user settings. And if I create the user settings, theoretically I should be able to test everything. So what you can let me do for the moment, it is for the user, add an in-memory user detail service, test that everything works with it in memory, and then put this in the database as well. So this way we can separate the testing, because if something doesn't work now, we know for sure that is because of our implementation on the client side. If everything works now, then we can easily just go further, move the users also to the database, and then test again and make sure that all of them one by one work well. I do prefer to test individually as much as possible what I do, because if I screw up something, then it's easier to find out. I know exactly it should be in the minimal thing that I've done previously to the last time I've tested. Because if I now add into database my own implementation of the user details, then I will not be sure whether my problem comes from the client details management or from the user details management or from something else. So at least it minimizes my work of seeing what's wrong in case something's wrong. So that's why what I will do now is I'll say public user details service, and I will use an in-memory for this, and then I will move this one to the database as well, no? So we can just say new in-memory user details manager, and you have user details, user with username, password, authority, build. Okay, and now this should work for us, because I know you will think, if you have seen my other videos, maybe you will think, hey, didn't he forget to add that key source? I mean, how will the tokens be signed and validated? And the answer is, well, they don't need, because what we did is we put in our database the reference tokens. See there? So that means we use opaque tokens. So in that case, I don't actually need at all to have a source of keys, because I use opaque tokens, no? So what I can do now is I can try to like literally start the application and test it and see if it's working, and if it isn't working, like see whatever it isn't working, why it isn't working. Yeah. Okay, and here it goes. And it started. It took quite a few seconds to start, because we have a lot of dependencies, no? So it's expected, but it started in the end. And if I'm going now back to my notepad, I'd like to show you that I put in place, like I don't want to stay a long time now trying to figure out from the specification which are the attributes you need, so I put them in place here. So let me explain you again how the authorization code flow works. Again, there were some feedbacks that it was not really quite well understood from my videos in the Spring Security playlist, so I want now to make all my best to clarify this for whom this hasn't been clear enough. And please do ask me any question if this doesn't sound right for you. So because let's actually make sure that you understand properly how these things work. So now, to make it clear, so I will actually draw a sequence diagram. Okay, so let me draw a sequence diagram with exactly those actors that we know they appear in the authorization code runtime, and they are the user. Now this is you trying to use an application. That's the client. This is the application you try to use. Like it can be the Angular app, single page application, a mobile application, a desktop application. Yeah, you use something as a user. And then of course, being that we use OAuth to OpenID connect, we have the Authorization Server, and then the backend of your application that is more or less useless on my diagram here, because the only thing that will draw against it is the last query when we have the token already. So actually what we are interested in is mainly how do you get a token? No, what is this so-called authentication grant type saying? So how do you get a token? What is the process of getting a token? So remember, the process is the following. When the user asks the client to do something, and the client realizes that they can't do that something because they have to access the resource server and they don't have a token, then the client knows that they have to get a token. So if the client doesn't have a valid token and they have to satisfy the user by obtaining some data or changing some data, meaning accessing resources on the resource server, the client knows that it won't be allowed to access resources on the resource server unless it has a valid token that will give it those privileges. So what happens here is that when the user tries to use the client, and the client figures out they don't have a way to demonstrate to the resource server that the user has been authenticated, then what the client does is redirect the user to a page of the authorization server. So this is basically a redirect of the user. I will draw it with an arrow back, but it's not a response. So because it's not a response and I don't want you to get confused, I will mark it with a dotted line. Okay, so the user now, what it has to do now it sees in the browser a page with a login, and that page is actually the page exposed by the authorization server. So that's why we actually needed to set up the form login authentication method. Remember that when building the application, when starting to build the authorization server, we set it up. Here you can see it on line 50. The form login is because if we want to be able to call the authorization, to be able to use the authorization code grant type, then the user has to authenticate somehow. So that's where they will authenticate. So the user tries to do something and the client says, hey, you are not authenticated. I will not be able to serve your request unless you go to this page, which is not mine, but it's the authorization server's page, and you authenticate, meaning you put your credentials, and then you will be if that's fine, if you use the right credentials, I will be able then further to do some more steps and get a token. So assume that the user logs in with the correct credentials. What will happen is that the authorization server will redirect it back to its client, and not only that, it will redirect it back, but it will also provide something very important, a means. Oops, I'm not sure what I did here. It looks like why is that ugly? Anyway, so what it does, it's also providing something called an authorization code, which is a value that is not yet the access token. So it's not that value that is the access card that will allow the client to access resources, but it's a very important value, because with this value further, the client can make one more request, and with that one more request, it will get back the access token, the access card. So here is actually, hey, get me a token. And finally, if everything is fine, this will be the token back. Okay, see the token back. So to get a token on this request, the client will have to provide this same code that they just received after the authentication, and then they have the token. And of course, finally, the reason why we did all this stuff is so that in the end the token can be used to access resource server's resources. So the last arrow on my diagram is actually the purpose for getting the token. Okay, so how does this look? Let's analyze it step by step. So we have two important things happening only. The first important thing is here, where the user has to log in, and the authorization server provides back. Can I make it red or something? Or anyway, I wanted to make it in a way in which is even more visible. Okay, so this is the first thing that happens. The second thing that happens is here, where using this authorization code, the client gets the access token. Okay, so this is basically the two big parts, and these two big parts, they are called the authorize and the token. Okay, so now normally to be able to do this, I need to have one authorize endpoint and one token endpoint. Fortunately, you have enabled OpenID Connect, and the OpenID Connect protocol, not only that it restricts some of the things, it makes it a little less flexible on the OAuth specification, but it also gives you some more details. And one of the details it gives you is actually which are the endpoints that one client can access for their purpose. And this, by protocol, this endpoint called well-known OpenID configuration, if you call it and everything is fine, what should give as a response, and you see it does for us, okay, is exactly the entire configuration that your server supports. And here you will find all the endpoints, including this authorize endpoint and the token endpoint. And they are the two endpoints that you use as the two steps in the process. Now, there is one more problem, and this problem is actually how can we make sure that the step number 2 is made by the same client for whom the user authorized. Because you see, if someone gets the authorization code, then they can make the request, and then they get the access token, and then they can call resources and act on behalf of the user. So that would be a hacker. You don't want someone else than the client for whom the user authorized the access be able to get the access token. Imagine the user is just someone and the client is another person. You have to you don't have time, and you ask someone to do something for you. But that someone has to prove that you have sent them. No, because if they don't prove that you have sent them, then they will not be able to access the resource. So when I was a kid, you know, of course, you can't buy alcohol and tobacco from stores, because you have to be a major for that. You have to, if you are underage, you can't do that. In our country here, it's 18. So I was just a kid. I was like 8 or 10. And of course, I shouldn't be able to buy alcohol and cigarettes. But yeah, my dad sometimes didn't have the time, you know, to go to the store, and they would send me. Now, normally the seller would not be able to sell me alcohol or cigarettes. So what happened is that my dad was sending a proof. Was giving me a proof that I could show to the seller that he was actually he gave me the money and he asked me to buy something for him, and it was not me who would buy those packet of tobacco and use it. Okay, so that's, imagine the same thing here. So it's the authorization server is the seller of the tobacco seller, okay, or the alcohol seller. The client is me, who is doing something on behalf of my father, but I have to prove that I do that on behalf of my father. Because if I wouldn't, then I wouldn't be authorized, and the seller wouldn't give me the tobacco, because they are not allowed to give the tobacco to underage children. So that's how it works. So now the problem is here that there are two steps actually. The first step is the authentication. It's a proof that I have. The second is, how do we prove that this request is not someone who who has stolen my proof, and they are trying to act on my dad's behalf, you know? Because in between, someone who could have stolen my proof, and then they use that proof on behalf of my father, but they will use the tobacco for them. So instead of me, who had the proof and the right to act on behalf of my father, someone else who stolen my proof will do that and will use the what they get from the seller. So that can happen with this kind of applications as well. No? So how do we make sure that this doesn't happen? Well, the least thing we can do, it's use here the client credentials. Because if we in here use the client ID and secret, then at least you know that not only that they got this proof, the authorization code. This is client here, okay? Yeah, got it. Not only that they got the proof, let's say it's easy to take. It's like maybe a note that I was holding, so it's easy to steal that from me. But the client ID and secret is something that can't be stolen from me. I have it, it's in my mind, for example, it's a password, and only if I do this I prove that I act on behalf of that I am who I am. Now the problem is that in theory it works. In practice you have to keep these details on the client side, and the client side can be a web application, can be a mobile application, and these applications don't necessarily have very good ways of keeping the client secrets. So there are ways in which someone might get their hands on this, and then if they get the hands on the client ID and secret, and then they can get the hands on the authorization code, then they can get a token. Of course it's not easy, but theoretically it's possible. So how does the authorization code, the grant type, in the end do something so that that's not possible? Well, it enhances all this with something that we call PKI. PKI means proof key for code exchange. and it works like this. Before this call, where the user would have to put their credentials, the client generates two values. One of them is named the verifier, which is nothing but a random value. And then the other one is called a challenge, which is actually a hash, like usually a SHA-256 hash over the verifier, which is the random value generated previously. So what the client does is it sends with this request here the challenge. Now, what if it sends the challenge? What's the big deal if it sends the challenge? Well, it sends its challenge, and the challenge can be stolen. But if you steal the challenge, being that the challenge is a hash, the hash functions in cryptography, they have an important characteristic. You can't get the input of an output. So if someone steals the challenge, they will not be able to do anything with it. Normally, what they are interested in is the verifier, as you will see immediately. But they can't get the verifier because you can't get the input of a hash output. That's the rule in cryptography. It's not a hash if you can get the input. The definition of a hash function is one in which you can't go back from the output to the input. So now, what it does to prove that this call, the second step, is made by the same client who was acting really on behalf of the user that authenticated, the client sends also not only the authorization code but the verifier. Any hash function has a matching method. That means you can match an input. If you have the input, you can say whether an output corresponds to it or not. You can't get the input from the output, but having already the input, you can say, hey, this input really was used to generate this output. That's how passwords actually work in general, no? That's how we do with passwords. When you store in a database a password, you store it hashed, like using a strong hashing function like bcrypt. And then when the user sends again the input, you can match the input to the output. It has the so-called matches method. It's the same matches method that you have even learned about at Spring Security when we discussed the password encoder here. This matches method. This matches method knows to tell you if an input is the real input of an encoding. That's the only thing it can do. It tells you true or false. It says, yes, this password, this raw password, really matches the encoded one. It can't go back from the encoding to the raw password, but it can tell you if a raw password matches an encoding. So basically, what happens here is that the authorization code will say, is this verifier the input used for the challenge? If the answer is yes, then the call is successful. If the answer is no, then the call is not successful. So that's how the client proves that step number one, for whom the user authenticated, is the same client as the one who asks for the token. Because only it can know the verifier, because this has only been generated previously to the call and has only been kept in the memory of the client. It's always a random value. It's always different for every call. So you can't steal it, because once it's been sent, it's been used, and then the next call will have another random value. So you can't use the same. So you see, with the PXE enhancement, it's really difficult, if not impossible, to step over and act on behalf of the user. It's a lot more secure using PXE, and that's why PXE is the default with the Authorization Server. It makes sense to be the default. You can disable it if you want, case in which using the client credentials would be enough, but I would not recommend you do that. So what I did here is that I have created my challenge and verifier previously, so I don't have, because that's something that the client would do, isn't it? So it's not my server's duty to do that. But as an idea, because I know people asked me, hey, how did you generate them? I want to show you the code. I want to show you also the code on how you generate your challenger and your verifier. There were like quite a few questions where people asked me, hey, how did you generate that? So I don't want to keep you in darkness, and I will show you the code that is also part of my Spring Security in Action book. This is not a book, but actually a document that I use with my trainings. But we will put the code. I will take it, I will explain it, and we will put the code and you will understand it, you see. 1 second. Okay, this is how you generate. So it's a very small piece of code with Java. If you want to generate it with Java, so the only thing you need to do is generate a random value, which can be, for example, a random array of bytes, and then you base 64 encode it, and that's the verifier. So it's always a random value. In my case here, what I generated is a random value of 32 bytes. Let's try it if you want. So let's literally create a small app that generates a challenge and the verifier. Okay. I'll put it in this E2 of the marathon. I will create a main file. The indexing is not ready yet. I think now it is. Okay, finally. So I'll put it on a main file here. Okay, so this is how you generate it, the code verifier. And then here how you generate the code challenge. So the code challenge is a SHA-256, which has been afterwards base64 encoded. So you take the verifier, you hash it, with SHA-256, and then again, for the comfort of sending it over the network, it's used as base64 encoded. So now we can verifier, we can print out both of them. Okay, so this is how you generate a pair of verifier and challenge. This is how I generated mine. Of course, the way you do that technically might differ in between technologies. So what I show you here is how you generate them with Java. Let's run it. So someone asked, are PXE and state parameters similar? I don't know, I never used the term state parameters. I'm only using like verifier and challenge. I don't know if they are also called state parameters. And see, here is a pair of verifier and generate. This is how easy you generate a pair. So this is how I generated mine. Going back here, previously I used a similar application. I generated my verifier and challenge, and then I'm using them. So that's what I'm doing. Of course, you need to make sure you provide also the challenge method, which is the hash method that has been used to generate this one. Yeah, and in my case it's SHA-256, so that's why the name of the value of this parameter is S256. And then you've seen me already where I took the authorize endpoint from. Yeah, I know it because I'm using the OpenID configuration, which is the default endpoint. I took it. I know which are the URLs for authorize and for token. So now what I do, I fill in with the parameters by specification, and I make sure that they are correct. So let's make sure they are correct, and then let's try using it and see if it works for us. Yeah, if it really works for us. So it's code, meaning that we want to use the authorization code grant type. Fine, that's what we want to do. It makes sense. It's client because this is the name of the client. Let's check it again in the database. This is the client ID. It's client. Okay, that's good. And then OpenID is one of the scopes available for our client. Let's check in the database. The scopes. OpenID. Okay. I don't think capital or small capitals should make any difference. Let's actually make sure that open. That is the same, just to make sure, because I don't know by heart if this uses compare by case or not. I think it's not by case, but yeah, just to make sure. What else? Redirect URI, http example.com auth. Redirect URLs, http example.com auth. Okay. And then I can assure you that I generated correctly the same way the challenge and the verifier. So basically taking this now and putting it into a browser, like just creating a new tab here and pasting it, redirects me to the login. Remember, going back on the diagram, so now what I simulate here is redirecting the user. The user will have to put in their credentials. No, in my case, for this example, something went wrong here, so we'll have to check anyway. But let me finish my the point I was saying. So I am Bill and 1 2 3 4 5. Okay, because I use the in memory. But next thing will be to put it. So table demo scope doesn't exist. Yeah, scope. And I forgot to put the table annotation. See, we'll have to take it again to restart the app, but I told you there might be still things that I didn't do well. So remember what it expects. It expects that the name of the class is the same as the name of the table. So in my case that doesn't match because the name of my table is scopes. Okay, so scopes. Okay. And I don't see any other problem here, so let me actually restart my app and try it again. Okay, so now I should be able to repeat the same action. I'm copying this here. It redirects me to login. Let me check the console again. Oh, I see another exception. Same I did for the redirect URL. So I've been so unattentive. Sorry guys. So table name, and what was the name actually? It was redirect_URLs. Let me check for the others now. So I scope, I put this one, yes, grant type, yes, token settings, yes, client, yes, and authentication method, yes. Okay, so those were the ones. I have to restart it again, okay? Okay, we wait a bit. And going back, I'm redirected, that's fine. Oh no, it's not fine actually. It started. So it redirected into example.com, but it says unauthorized client, which is something fishy. No, I don't have any more problems here at least, but it didn't ask me to authenticate, which is pretty bad. It's pretty bad. So the funny thing is that it redirects me to example.com, but it tells me unauthorized client. And I'm not sure exactly what that means. So I will have to actually make sure, I will have to debug a bit and see what happens. So especially, I think especially in one of these, and then in from the client, because it looks like maybe somewhere here is something that we might have wrongly set up. So let's start debugging on this. Okay. So now it's stopped in the find by client ID. Fine, that's good. And then if we go one step further, we got the client. Let's see if the client is indeed what we expect. So I think that would be see what's in the optional. So is this client? Let's see, maybe it's one of our mappings that didn't go well. So the authentication method, client secret basic, looks fine. The grant types, I have two grant types, the authorization code and the client credentials. Could it be that the grant types are not what they expect? So let's see. See, they are with small letters. Maybe this is the problem. Maybe this is the problem. So let's make sure we store them the way they expect them to be. So that means in the database, in the grant types table. Okay, that would be one. And then that would be the second. If you want, because someone asked about refresh tokens, I think we can even put the refresh token here, grant type. If you want refresh tokens, then you need to put them. Now let's see again if that was the problem or something else. Oh, the app didn't start, sorry. I was too eager. So let's wait for the app to start first, and then I will call the endpoint again. Okay. So here it goes, just going fast through it this time. Oh, I see it's working now. So indeed, it seems that that was the problem. To be honest with you guys, I would have expected to work with capital and small letters as well, because it doesn't make a big difference, isn't it? But it seems that the implementation wasn't made that way, so we have to comply. So now what I do, I log in with, what was it, bill and 12345, I think, my in memory. Oh, here it is. So it's bill and 12345. Cool. I'm signing in. Let's actually get rid of the breakpoints. I don't think we need them anymore. And that's good. That's good. Because now we have been redirected to exactly the URL we have expected. And look, we have been provided with the code. So this is the authorization code. And now on the diagram, we are on this. We have authenticated. We got back the authorization code. So we have just finished the first step on the diagram, the authorize step. Now, of course, the second step is the next one, where we'll have to call the token endpoint, provide the authorization code and the verifier, and get back the access token. Let's see if this one is working as well. So I'm going to copy the value of the authorization code, and in Postman, okay, in Postman I already have the token endpoint. See, let's go through the parameters. So you know where this token endpoint came from, where I found it from. So remember, everything is in the OpenID configuration. Here is the token endpoint. That's why I knew. Remember, you need to use a post for the call. And since our authentication setup in the database was client secret basic, then it means that we also need to make sure we set up basic authentication with the client secrets. That's how we configured it. So if you want to take this out, you can take it out, but if you specified that you want to use HTTP basic, then you make sure that you use it. Then of course you have the client ID, the redirect URI. You specified the grant type you use, the authorization code. Here is where you copy the value you just got in the browser. And then the last parameter is the code verifier, who has to of course match with the challenge that you have previously sent. This is part of the pair I created, the way I have shown you how to do. So I'm pretty sure it should be correct. So then the next thing I do is send the request, and look, the access token is here. And you'll see it's so small, it's not a JVT. It's not a JVT because that's the way we configured it. We explicitly said we want a reference token, which is an opaque one. So going back to my explanation, Remember, we have two types of tokens, and what we have configured now our authorization server to use is the opaque one. So that's why we get this token, which is not a JVT but an opaque one. So if I take this one, being an opaque token, there is one thing I can do with this opaque token, and that is introspect it. Fortunately, the introspection endpoint is also something that you can find in the OpenID configuration somewhere below. See? So here you get the introspection, you get the revocation, you get the logout, because you had all these questions about how do we revoke a token, how do we log out session, and so on and so forth. So it's basically just calling some endpoints in the end, no? So if I'm going now to the introspection and I'm putting the parameter token, I don't know what I did here, but with the token I copied, then this will tell me all the details I need about this token. That's introspection. It's validating the token is valid or not and giving me all the details I need. So look, it tells me it's active, that means it's a valid token, it's been created for subject bill, subject being the user, audience client, audience is the application bill uses, and then it tells me when it expires, it tells me the scope, the issuer URL, so the app who issued it, the client ID, and that's basically it. Okay, so see, it's working. And our client details are in the database. Let's put also the user details, don't you want? Did you miss to map refresh token? In refresh token to client in DB. Did I? It's possible because, let me see. Do I get a refresh token? Yeah, I didn't get. So you are very good, very good. Good, very good attention. Thank you very much. So somewhere I might have missed something, did I? Because you see I don't have a refresh token. So where did I miss it? Where did I miss it? In the DB? Was it in the DB? So grant types. Yeah, that's it. Very good. Very good. I'm so happy you guys not only stay here with me, but you are so attentive. You are really good. So the reason, and I didn't even observe that, see, that I was so distracted with my explanations about the access token and introspection, stuff like that. I didn't observe that I don't have a refresh token, but you didn't not only observe that we don't have a refresh token here, but you also have seen what the cause is, so I didn't have to search for it. So yeah, indeed, if you don't make the relationship correctly, then you don't have the grant type, then you don't have a refresh token. Now, next time we generate a token, you will be able to see that that we have the refresh token as well. Good, very good, very good. I'm very happy you are not only here with me, but you are also very attentive and you catch all these things. So I really hope that what I did here today will be helpful and will help you understand very well how to use everything. So now next thing I want to get completely rid of what's in memory, and I want my users to be in the database as well. Okay, so let's put my users in the database. Let's put the users in the database. So that means I have to create a users table. With ID, username, password. And then with users, we also have mandatory either authorities or roles. So let me create an authorities table as well. Say authority with a given name for a given user. This is my foreign key, okay? Let me fill in my user. I will just give it a different name. I will say this is Laur, password 12345. Don't worry guys, that's not the passwords I use in real world cases. And authorities, Lawrence, you can read. Yeah, probably he can read. He learned that many years ago. And now back to this. So what do? I get rid of this bin completely. See? And now I create the entities. So I need the user entity. Make sure that I give the proper name for the table, because I think I named it users. And authority. Was the name I gave, so it's authorities and then name. Okay, so private string name getter setter, and here should be private user many authorities to one user. Again, this would normally be a many-to-many relationship now, but I simplified it. And then in the user, if I want to have the authorities, and I will need the authorities definitely, I have a private list of authorities, let's name it. And then you use one user to many authorities, and then you are on the other side of the relationship and you have a bidirectional relationship. On the other side, you need to make sure that you use the mapped by with the value of the mapping column. And that's it. And now I write the repository. Okay, I properly extend JPA repository of user and primary key integer. That's the way I made it. And I'm pretty sure I will need something like getting the user by username now. So I say find user by username. Of username, and And then remember that I always prefer to give the query even if theoretically the method would be understood by Spring Data. I find it easier to read this way. User U, username is username, okay, something like that. Okay. So now I can write my services, user service. So one user may have many roles. Yes, one user may have many roles. That's exactly what I did here. The authority, of course, is what my role, the table that holds my roles, but its user is one too many roles. Okay. So now to make it a service, I make it a service. I will inject the repository, and I will make sure this implements the user details service contract. So Spring Security knows this is the component. This is the component to use to get the user details. So that's what I implement here. User repository. And then I will need somehow to map the user to the user details to be able to take it here. So normally it will be var user is user repository find of username, but now I will not be able to return it unless I have a way to mark it as being of the user details contract. And what I usually do in that case is I create an adapter class like security user, and this adapter class, what it does, it implements the user details contract. Overrides its methods. And wraps entity, basically adapting the entity. You know, that's what adapter pattern is. It's adapting something to some contract. In our case, adapting the user entity to the user contract, to the user details contract. Spring Security knows. Yeah. Okay. So that means, well, in my case, I didn't create the capability to have accounts enabled. I usually, my OCD tells me I should put them in a different order, these methods. And then that will be username. It's easy, so get username. Password is easy, so get password. Authorities, so these are the authorities or roles. Yeah, we can like get them, say user get authorities stream, but then remember that we should map them to grant authority. I'm not even sure why this compiles, if you believe me, because I said user. Oh, did I? Oh, that's wrong. Sorry, that's why it compiles. It shouldn't. So it's not this user actually. Be very careful with the imports. So this should be the user in our entities. Okay, and now this doesn't compile anymore, which makes sense because I was really Yeah, it didn't make sense for me. Hey, why does this compile? It shouldn't compile because it's not the authorities. I need now to map them. No, I need to say map the authority to a new simple granted authority with that name. And if I want to do that, then I have to still make sure that this is eager fetched. No, fetch eager like this. Okay. So now it should be like user map the user to a new security user isn't that okay? Or else throw, and then Spring Security creates this username not found exception. It's actually a runtime exception. So normally you don't need to put it in a throws clause, but it's there for documentation purposes. So what does it say here? So it says security user new doesn't want that. Why it doesn't want that? Because I get the user there, so it should be let me see, did I do something wrong? So user security user of that should be it, no, of user, and still it doesn't want that because I provide the core user details. How is that possible? Did I wrongly import it here as well? Yes, I did. Oh my god. So no, it should be the user from the entity. So be very careful, because if the import is not right, then nothing will actually work. Okay, now it really makes sense. Now I should go back to my method reference syntax, and this looks good to me. So that's how theoretically we've managed to also put the user details in the database. So see, I no longer have in my authorization server anything. The only ugly thing which we can, if you want, solve as well is use a different password encoder here. We can do that. We can create some add endpoints somehow and use them to add the encrypted passwords, but that's not something like extraordinary. But otherwise, as you can see, at least the information about clients and users, we put them. And normally, yes, if you have any kind of other way to customize, like you have server settings you can put in the database, you can literally put everything you want to be in a database if that's what you need. But anyway, let's actually restart the app and see if that's working the way it is now. And if that's working, then I think the next thing we can do is try to also implement a resource server, because I start to feel a little bit tired, so I'm not sure I will be able to stay a lot more time here. So I want to complete the system and see if it's working. Maybe we add more clients in the database. One should be opaque, the other JVT. We create a resource server. Let's see what we still can do. Okay, good. So I started it, and now I will recreate the same flow. So I'm going to the browser. I'm logging in with, I think it's John in my database. It's a John. No, it's actually mine. It's Laur. 1 2 3 4 5. Sign in. Yay! I got the code. I'm getting the code and simulating now the token request. So I put the request, and why does it take such a long time? Yeah, I get the token. Finally, access token. As you can see, first of all, it's still opaque because we didn't change that, so it's normally still opaque. We get a refresh token because I corrected that thing that you told me about. Thank you very much. And then the rest of the stuff is the same, so nothing special. I could prove that this works actually if I add one more client, say the next client I add to client app with secret, and I want this second client, I want it to have, so let's take them one by one actually. So I don't need different users. Authentication methods, I want to have the same, so I want to authenticate using HTTP basic. Okay, but now I assign it to client 2. The grant types, say that only the authorization code is what I need for this one. Okay. Redirect URLs, we can keep the same because it's anyway just demonstrative, so it doesn't make any big difference if we change it to something else. Okay. Scopes, again, we can keep it the same because we didn't use it anywhere, so normally the scope would be used in authorization configurations, but that's on the resource server side, and it doesn't make any difference to our implementation here. And token settings, and that's where I would like to have the access token time to live doesn't really matter. No, you can put 10 hours, but I would like to have JVT token here. So I would like to have a JVT token. That means I would like to have the format as self-contained, which means this one here. No. So here's the big difference between client and client app, and that's it. So now I should be able to redo the same, but in the end, if I use the client app, I will get instead of an opaque token, I will get a non-opaque one. So I will copy this, and then I will change only the client ID. We kept the same scope, we kept the same redirect URI, code challenge and verifier can be kept the same as long as they are correct one with the other. So now if I'm going here, I can say, oh, I didn't log out, and because of that it doesn't ask me the user to log in again, which is fine, but it generated a different authorization code, and now that allows me to go here, copy the code, the client is different, and the authorization, client ID and secret is also different. If I remember, I kept the secret, but the client ID is different, and the others can stay the same, and I send it, and see, I didn't change anything in the app. I didn't even restart the app, but I of course I added to the database what I need to add. So now I have a different response for a different client, which is exactly what I expected. Now I get a JVT. This is a JVT, not an opaque one. You can see that it's larger, and of course I can prove it's a JVT by going into JVT.io and decoding it, and you can see its content. See, this is content. Yay! And I didn't configure a source, so you might ask, hey, how is that possible that's working and I have a key ID here? And the reason is that the last versions of the authorization server actually configure that out of the box for you, but normally you would have to configure a key source that gets the keys from somewhere, like from a vault or something. We will not do that today, but normally that's how it would work. And you can see expiration, it should be like how many, 10 hours, or how many did I ask for? So it says the token expires at my time 0030, which is basically like 10 hours from now on, see? So it's exactly next day, May 28th, so 10 hours from now on. So it applied correctly also the token settings. So you see, it's really easy to customize and do whatever you want, put them in the database. The only thing you need to understand is that this is like Lego pieces. You just take whatever Lego piece you want, you create something different. It's your decision on how you want to implement this or that. So let's also try to implement the resource server, because I don't want to end today's marathon before being able to show you also the simplicity of a resource server, the way you can define a resource server. So the last project for today, and then I will be out, guys, because, well, I don't want to remain without my voice completely, but we will have different events, no worries. If you continue joining me on the channel, you will see different other events, longer or shorter. Oh damn, I forgot to add the dependencies. So oh no, I actually created them. So I actually created I was unattentive, and I created a Maven, a simple Maven, and while that works, I don't really want to now have to put by hand everything. So let me do that. So I'm gonna close this one. I'm gonna go to delete the project I created, and then I will recreate it with Spring Boot initializer, because that's what I wanted actually at the very beginning. So Spring initializer, and then it says OAuth 2 marathon E3 actually, I think it's E3, and say web security, and it's a resource server, so I will check the resource server as well. So let's wait a bit for this to be indexed, and then I can create a configuration file. Of course, I would need a very small demo endpoint if I want to prove things. And I will create a controllers class. Okay, this is the protected resource, and then I'm creating the security configuration. Like any other configuration class, we use the configuration annotation, and then the security filter chain. And then normally I need to configure the resource server in such a way in which it works with my authorization server. So that is, first of all, I have to provide the OAuth to resource server configuration, and then I have to decide whether I use JWT or opaque tokens. Now, I know you've asked me earlier, hey, but what do we do in case we have like more servers, or maybe we have one of them is opaque, the other is JWT? And the answer is, if you want to customize this even further, you can go with the Authentication Manager Resolver. That will help you customize, and I have a video about that in the playlist, so go and watch that one. It will show you how to customize. I think it's the last video where I discuss about multi-tenancy. So you will see that in that case, by the HTTP request, you may decide if you want to go with an opaque or a non-opaque token. So you have basically all the information you need on the request to implement the decision for that. Now, in my case, let's say that I created for the JWT. So if I create for the JWT, then the only thing I really need to set is the key set URI, which is basically again something that you have here in the OpenID configuration. So somewhere here is the key set URI. I'm not sure, I can't select it. my computer looks slower than usual, but I think I have it here somewhere as well, so I will do it like this. Okay, slower, very slow actually. And then I will put it right here. Normally, of course, should come from an properties file. And I make sure I keep all the requests authenticated. So normally that should prove now that without this correct token it should not work. So I change the server port so that I can start the resource server at the same time with the authorization server, because yeah, I can't use port 8080 for both and start them at the same time normally. And then I should prove from Postman that I can use a valid token. And here it is, it started on 1990, so I'm going here and using a new tab, going on headers, on authorization, and I should copy exactly what I received. So this token here. So I see even my computer got a bit tired, so that's why once I show you this, I will probably then end the stream. And that's it. So it's working. Now you asked me also about revocation. So you said, hey, what about the revocation? Because you might want to be able to revoke tokens to get rid of them. So I want to answer that question as well. Well, fortunately, revocation goes out of the box. So with introspection, you can validate any kind of token. So let me show you that. I'm going to paste not the opaque token, but the JWT one that I have just used also. So in this case, you'll still be able to see the values and the fact that the token is active. So the introspection not only works for opaque tokens, but also for non-opaque ones. And the reason is because if you want to use revocation, which is, and you might have seen it earlier in the default configuration, which is a different URL, it's very easy. So to revoke the token, you just revoke it using the client and secret that created it. So in my case, I have to be careful because my client with which I created the token is called app. So app, and then I'm going here and I want to say, hey, please revoke this token. And to handle key, I can assume it has been revoked, but I will also go to introspect it again. And now when I introspect it again, the same token, it says, where should it be? Very slow, sorry for that. It seems that again it became tired, my computer, so that's why I will also end it up. But you see the result. So you see the same token that previously I introspected and it showed me, true and the details. Now you can see it says active false. Now, funny thing, if you go to the last tab where we tried the demo endpoint and you try it again, what will happen is that this will work, will continue working. And who guesses why this continues working? Because the way in which we implemented the resource server. So remember, when we implemented the resource server, we have only implemented it based on the key set URI. And now what happens is that the resource server doesn't go back to introspect again. So the resource server in my case only validates the signature, but that didn't change because the token itself didn't change. So unless the resource server introspects the authorization server, it will not be able to see that the token has been revoked. So just to be able to do that, what you would have to do is change the way you implemented the resource server to use introspection. Fortunately, that's also easy enough, or at least short enough, if not easy, with the authorization server framework. So that's the last thing I'm doing, and then I'm answering your questions, hopefully as short as I can, and I will end up. But yeah, so this is a introspection URI, and you have to provide a few things. What you have to provide for the introspection is the URI, sorry. So let me take the introspection URI. Which is this one. And I'm going to put it right here. And then you also need, so remember, when you have introspection, you need some client credentials. These are not the client, this is not the client, the client app. The client credentials, so now the resource server, when you do introspection, the resource server also acts as a client, you see, for the authorization server. So that means you have to register the server itself. So in the database, what I would do is I would go in the database and I will make sure that I have some resource server credentials as well here. Otherwise, my resource server would not be able to act as a client. So we need to have client credentials for the resource server as well. And that would be, so in my case, I'm going back and now I use this client ID and secret of the resource server. So now the resource server itself becomes a client. And now if I retry this, with that token, it should not work anymore, because what happens is that the resource server will introspect, will see that even if the token says it doesn't expire, because it will expire in a little bit less than 10 hours from now on, it will still not be accepted because it has been revoked previously. So if you go now back to your Postman, send the request, that should be a 401 or 403, I'm not sure exactly which one of them, we'll see now, but anyway, it shouldn't be 200. 401 unauthorized. Yes, that's exactly what we wanted to see. So you see, token revocation. So that's basically it as well with the token revocation. So let me see. I've seen some messages. I will try answering them, and then guys, I will be out. So okay. If I start Microsoft, maybe I will start. I will see. Thank you very much for your appreciations. So then a couple of questions regarding authenticating client against authorization server. What is the difference between client secret basic, client secret post methods? Very good question. So client secret basic, it uses standard HTTP basic. So here it is where we use the post. We put this here in the basic authentication, while the client secret post uses them as parameters. So the only difference between client secret basic and client secret post is actually the way in which you send the client credentials. The basic authentication takes these credentials, and you might have seen me explaining this in other videos. The way HTTP basic works is that it concatenates the username and the password with a colon like this, and then it base 64 encode them. Okay, so that's what HTTP basic does. That's why if you go to the headers, you will see basically in the one of the hidden headers here, this value is the base 64 of username colon password. So if I take it and I open, try to find the base 64 decoder online and put this value here and decode it, you will actually see app colon secret, because that's basically exactly what we used. If you go back to authorization, yeah, app secret. While in the post, you would simply put them as parameters on the post instead of putting them according to the HTTP basic. Now, for the second question, when we might need to use JVT, client secret JVT, for client authentication, that's a little bit more complicated. So the idea is that you can turn your authorization server, that's something I don't have the time to write now. Oh, what's this exception? Something with the time to live seems to be strange, but anyway, I will check it afterwards, because I don't think it's something essential. Anyway, we've seen that it worked, so I'm surprised that it shows this exception. So I was telling you, in regards to the authentication, no, that was the question. So the authentication, it goes here, here. So you might turn your authorization server to act also as a resource server, so have authentication with JVT against it. When would you do that? When instead of having form login, for example, like we did here, which is generated from the server side, you would like your authorization server to be designed as a single page application, for example. So say instead of having the form login designed with the default form login authentication, which is server side rendered, you want to have an Angular or React application as the front end of your authorization server. And guess what happens in that case? but in that case you will have to rely on the tokens for authentications as well. So in that case you will have to make your authorization server accept and understand JWT tokens, and that's the idea. You can do that as well. Maybe somewhere in the future I will demonstrate how that works. But that's in the more complicated case where you want to have something like that, so something like this setup. And private key JWT, I didn't try it. It sounds like it uses a private static key for authentication. But I will check it out and let you know, okay? Because I'm not like really sure which is the difference. They sound very similar to me, and I'm not sure exactly what's the difference. So I will have to check it out. Okay, thank you very much for your appreciations again. Yeah, I don't see other questions. So I expect that at least I made with this video a lot of things more clear to those who had the questions about how we put the data in the database. We discussed how to, we almost have stored everything in the database in this tutorial, and you will have my code on a repository after this talk ends. So you can check it out yourself, you can try it yourself. You can change it, maybe try to upgrade it further. Maybe in the next video we'll also discuss about how to make it even better in terms of readability. Stuff like this static methods, is not something that I really love to do in a real world app, but again, as a compromise to time, we used it today because you see it took us 4 hours actually, so it's almost 4 hours since we've started meeting and built this system together. So next time maybe I will even take as a separate subject, hey, let's take this authorization server we created together and let's move some of the things and make it a little bit better in terms of readability. But the idea is that I wouldn't have the static methods, but I would most likely have separate classes for that, as some of you actually suggested as well. Yeah, I can say we made what we didn't do, like maybe you wanted as well, JWT customizer. I think I showed that in one of the videos on the channel. I could have used it here. At least I wanted to remind you that you can customize the JWT token. So if you have a JWT token, you can have a customizer, an OAuth 2 customizer, JWT token customizer that shows you how to do that. So I think I even have somewhere here some code, some old code maybe, where I have the customizer or something. Oh, here it is. See, I remember that I used this in a different presentation. So like something like this. So just create a bean, and I had a presentation where I proved that. Oh, okay, this is imported. So this is how you add a custom claim, for example, if you want. And remember, you have the context, and the context tells you things on which you can take decisions. Like for example, the principal, you may want to take the decision and do that according to who makes the requests, and you can implement the logic here. So something like this is also possible. We didn't go through it. Also the password encoder, remember we used the NOP password encoder, but you can take it as homework, try to change this into a bcrypt password encoder. In case you do that, you'd also have to somehow create some endpoints to add the password correctly hashed in the database, otherwise it wouldn't work. But we did a lot more stuff than I used to do previously, so I hope that at least the content we managed to put in these 4 hours of marathon here helped you a lot. And now I'm still waiting for your questions, so I'm still looking forward to your questions. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have other questions or requests so I can put them on a list and create some new videos. I will hopefully have more time than I had in the previous weeks to work for the channel, but I definitely didn't stop here, so I will not stop here. So you will have more content from my side, and I'm looking forward to create more content for you. So write me your messages either here on YouTube, and remember that you can also find me on LinkedIn or on Twitter, and you can suggest things, you can follow me, and you can send me messages as well. With that being said, guys, I see that some of you already left, and it's pretty short because yeah, it has been a long time and I need to get some rest as well, and maybe a fresh cold beer. I hope you the same, and until next time we meet, I will say just thank you for being here. Hope you enjoyed. Have an excellent time for learning further, and goodbye. Cheers.